Augustus, the first emperor of Rome as we know it. As the soft light of dawn crept over the horizon, a new chapter of Rome began. The Republic, that proud experiment of governance, had collapsed under the weight of unbridled ambition, bloody civil wars, and political decay. Yet from the ashes of this struggle for supremacy, one man emerged, calm, calculated, and destined to reshape the world as we know it today. His name was Octavian, but history would remember him as Augustus. He was the adopted son of the legendary Julius Caesar. In the Forum, where senators had plotted and schemed, he restored the temple of Castor and Pollux, a symbol of divine favor upon the city. On the banks of the Tiber, he constructed the port of Augustus, a testament to Rome's enduring maritime power. For Rome to flourish, he had to manage the expectations of its people. As the years rolled by and his rule became more entrenched, he began to subtly shape the way Rome viewed him, not as a conqueror or a soldier, but as the embodiment of the Roman ideal. He sponsored public building projects, commissioned works of art, and ensured that statues of himself and other prominent figures were placed in prominent locations throughout the city. Through these seemingly innocuous acts, Augustus cultivated an image of Rome as eternal. He ruled over its dignity, its eternity, its hope. The empire he had built was vast, prosperous, and secure, but at what cost? Had he merely traded one form of tyranny for another? The answer, like so many things in life, lay somewhere in the balance. For Augustus was not just a conqueror, nor was he merely a statesman. He was a pragmatist, a man who adapted and evolved in response to the challenges of his time. He had come to power promising to restore the Republic, but had ended up creating something entirely new. Yet within the gilded cage of his own making, Augustus walked carefully. Power, once seized, must be protected. His steps were watched, his legacy weighed. In the end, Augustus's legacy is a testament to the complexities of power and the ambiguities of history. He was a man who played the game of politics better than anyone before or after him, a man who seized power but shared it without losing control. He was a warrior who won without conquering, a builder who shaped an empire without leaving his desk. He was above all a man who understood the human condition, the allure of power, the burden of responsibility, and the bittersweet nature of legacy. As the sun set on Augustus's life and the Roman Empire stood poised on the brink of its golden age, one thing was certain: Rome would never be the same again. And in the annals of history, Augustus's name would echo as the first among equals, the first emperor, the princeps. He had given Rome peace, but at what cost? Had he sacrificed the soul of the Republic on the altar of stability? Was Rome still Rome, or had it become something new, something different? An unchanging, a concept he encapsulated in the phrase monumentum animi, a monument to the spirit. It was a subtle yet powerful message that resonated deeply with the Roman people. Their city, their culture, and their way of life were not merely enduring, they were destined to endure. Throughout the long years of civil war and political turmoil, the Roman populace had grown accustomed to bread and circuses, a steady stream of free food and entertainment that had been used as a tool to win their support. The specter of Julius Caesar, the man whose assassination had plunged Rome into chaos, loomed large in Augustus's mind. Senators who once held real power were now reduced to a consultative role. Elections were still held, but candidates had to first secure Augustus's approval. Rome had changed, and Augustus knew that those who clung to the ideals of the old republic were a threat to his rule. As time passed, he gradually stripped away the remaining vestiges of republicanism, centralizing power in his own hands. But he did so with such finesse and subtlety that the average Roman went about their daily life unaware of the seismic shift in the very structure of their government. Despite being hailed as the first emperor, Augustus had carefully avoided the title of king. Rome had sworn never to have a king again after the overthrow of the Etruscan monarchy in 509 BC. To have called himself king would have been to court the wrath of the Roman people. So instead, he styled himself princeps, the first citizen, a subtle yet significant distinction that nevertheless concealed the truth. Augustus was an emperor. Faced with this reality, Augustus made the decision to continue this tradition, albeit with his own twist. While he did maintain the practice of providing free grain to the poor, he simultaneously invested heavily in large-scale public spectacles, such as the construction of the Colosseum and the Naumachia, an artificial lake used for mock naval battles. These events were not merely diversions for the masses, but carefully orchestrated displays of Roman power and grandeur designed to bolster loyalty to the regime. And throughout the empire, he initiated a program of public works that not only provided jobs for the unemployed, but also symbolized the return of order and prosperity. These projects, which included the construction of roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, were not merely meant to impress. They were vital lifelines that connected the far-flung provinces to the heart of Rome, fostering a sense of unity and purpose. And after years of turmoil and bloodshed, he had emerged victorious. He knew he must address the deep-rooted issues that had plagued the Republic and had ultimately brought it to its knees. With shrewdness and patience, he tackled the thorny problems of land reform, taxation, and the distribution of wealth. By enacting policies that granted land to the impoverished, reformed the tax system, and rewarded his supporters, Augustus effectively neutralized potential threats to his authority while simultaneously enhancing the lives of ordinary Romans. However, perhaps his most significant contribution to the stabilization of Rome was the establishment of the Praetorian Guard, an elite military force tasked with the defense of Rome itself. By creating this elite guard, Augustus could now count on a loyal and disciplined army to protect the heart of his empire from any potential internal threats. Now, standing on the brink of a new era, he faced the monumental task of healing a fractured empire and establishing the foundations of what would become the most enduring legacy of the ancient world, the Roman Empire. His rise to power had been nothing short of extraordinary. When Julius Caesar, his uncle by marriage, was assassinated in 44 BC Octavian, along with Caesar's grandnephew Marcus Junius Brutus, inherited his uncle's mantle and his will. Although Caesar had left instructions for Octavian to wed Livia, daughter of his ally, the Triumvir, and to adopt his young son, Gaius, the Senate, led by a group of aristocrats known as the Liberators, opposed the will and declared Octavian's claim invalid. Not to be deterred, Octavian, who later took the name Augustus, aligned himself with Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, and together with Lepidus, they formed the Second Triumvirate. This alliance divided the Roman world among them, setting the stage for a complex game of political maneuvering and warfare that would ultimately leave Octavian as the sole ruler of Rome. Through cunning diplomacy and decisive military campaigns, including the famous Battle of Actium against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, Octavian established undisputed control over the empire. Yet the path to absolute power had been fraught with peril, leaving Rome exhausted and in dire need of stability. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of battle faded into memory, Octavian found himself at the helm of a shattered empire. The civil wars had left deep scars across the land. The treasury was depleted, the provinces were demoralized, and the people of Rome were weary of conflict. But amidst the ruins, Octavian saw an opportunity to forge a new beginning. With quiet hands, he set about the task of rebuilding not just the physical structures of Rome, but the very fabric of Roman society. But Augustus understood that true stability could only be achieved through more than just bricks and mortar. Yet even as Rome basked in the glow of its renewed prosperity and security, Augustus knew that the true test lay ahead. However, Augustus understood that true power lay not in brute force, but in perception. Yet amidst the grandeur and pageantry, there was a growing unease within the halls of power. He maintained the facade of republican institutions, the Senate, the consulships, the assemblies, but all the while, every major decision was filtered through him. Behind the facade of the Republic, Augustus ruled not just over Rome, but the very idea of Rome. And so, as the twilight years of his life approached, Augustus found himself not just at the peak of his power, but at the crossroads of his legacy. In doing so, he had managed to preserve many of the institutions of the old regime, but in reality, all roads led to him. From Britannia's wild shores to the sands of Egypt, Rome's eagle had soared, its standards unfurled against the winds of change. A hush had fallen over the empire. Roads, those arteries of the empire, connected cities like a heartbeat. Through bustling markets overflowed with exotic spices, silk, and stories from every land beneath the sun. Citizens lounged in public baths, argued in forums, and watched gladiators fight under the sun-drenched sky. This was Rome at her zenith, an empire that had reached for the stars and held the world in her grasp. For while these emperors held court and made law, the foundations of Rome's greatness were quietly shifting. Yet this prosperity, like water left unchecked, carved out deep chasms of disparity. As the urban centers flourished, the countryside, where agriculture was the lifeblood, suffered. Fields lay untended, farmhouses fell into disrepair, and the backbone of Rome's sustenance crumbled. The length of supply lines posed logistical nightmares. The vast distances made effective defense a daunting task, leaving Rome vulnerable to the ambitions of her neighbors. For beneath the splendor of the great city, subtle transformations were underway. In the bustling marketplaces, the influx of foreign goods mingled with local produce, creating a complex economic landscape. But as trade flourished, so did the disparities between the wealthy merchants and the struggling artisans. This growing divide fueled social unrest, fanning the flames of discontent among the populace. His Meditations, a personal journal turned philosophical masterpiece, grappled with the complexities of human existence and the impermanence of life. The grandeur of Rome's past was fading, and the empire teetered on the brink of transformation. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was but a memory, and the echoes of decline resonated across the vast domains of the once invincible empire. His words, a beacon of wisdom, offered guidance not just for himself, but for all who followed. It is a narrative of emperors who grappled with the weight of legacy, of philosophers who sought wisdom in times of chaos, and of common folk who navigated the complexities of a changing world. It is a story that mirrors our own, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the pursuit of virtue, wisdom, and peace remains a worthy endeavor. It was a precarious balancing act, and as the years passed, the fragility of Rome's defensive structure loomed larger, threatening to unravel the very fabric of the Pax Romana. The story of Rome's twilight years, the rise of barbarians, and the fall of empires is not over yet. There is more to come. Stay tuned for the next episode. This neglect would have profound consequences, sowing the seeds of discontent and weakening the empire's capacity to feed its growing population. Philosophers like Seneca and Epictetus, with their teachings on virtue and resilience, offered solace. They recognized the need to address the growing social and economic disparities and called for a more equitable distribution of wealth and opportunities, but their pleas often fell on deaf ears. Stoic ideas emphasizing self-control and endurance found fertile ground in the hearts of the people seeking to navigate the challenges of these changing times. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had woven its spell over the empire, lulling its people into a false sense of security. But as their fame grew, so did their influence. The gladiators, once mere slaves and prisoners, became symbols of Roman might and a force to be reckoned with. Their growing power threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of power in the empire. But beneath this tranquil surface, the currents of change were rising, threatening to overturn the very foundations of Rome's prosperity. Loyalty, the bedrock of military strength, was shifting from the empire to the generals. As provincial governors amassed power, some began to answer to their ambitions rather than to Rome. This growing disloyalty, a cancer within the heart of Rome's defense system, threatened to turn the legions, once the bulwarks of imperial authority, into instruments of personal ambition. Swords were sheathed, legions rested. Rome at her height was a colossus, a giant whose shadow stretched far beyond the Tiber's banks. Along the northern borders of Britannia, a fierce people known as the Picts stirred. In the distant lands of Dacia, the fierce warriors yearned for freedom. And on the eastern frontier, nomadic tribes tested the might of Rome's legions. These restless souls, yearning for independence, became the first cracks in the armor of Roman peace. Their rebellions, though subdued, served as stark reminders that Rome's grip on her vast territories was not absolute. In the bustling heart of Rome and the echoing halls of power, the emperors of this golden age held court. Under his reign, Rome's borders were secure, her coffers full. Hadrian the thinker pondered in palaces, preferring the company of poets and philosophers to that of generals. He commissioned grand building projects, leaving behind timeless structures that still stand as silent sentinels of Rome's grandeur. Then came Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, who grappled with the burdens of power while tending his Meditations, a personal journal that echoed with Stoic wisdom. These emperors, each a study in contrast, wove the tapestry of Rome's later years. Their legacies a blend of wisdom, ambition, and the quiet acceptance of mortality. Men like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, each a ruler in his own right, shaped the destiny of Rome. Her domain was a patchwork quilt of cultures, a mosaic of peoples bound together by roads, by laws, and by the legend of Rome. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had descended upon this vast realm, ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity and stability. For nearly 2 centuries, Rome basked in a rare season of peace, a stillness so profound it was called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Not peace as we know it, not the gentle dove of our times, but the quiet stillness of an empire so vast and powerful that no one dared challenge it. A peace born not of love, but of fear. Rome's banners fluttered in the deserts of Egypt and the jungles of India. But behind this facade of grandeur, beneath the marble and gold, the first tremors of decline were stirring. Yet, as the sun rose and set over the sprawling empire, casting long shadows of change, even the mighty Rome felt the first stirrings of decline, the subtle shifts that foreshadowed the twilight of her glory. Trajan, the Spaniard, who climbed the heights of power, ushered in a golden age of prosperity. But within the imperial court, the seeds of change were taking root. In the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, wealth flowed like a mighty river, nourishing the cities and pampering the populace. As Rome reveled in the luxuries of peace, the flames of discontent flickered on the frontiers of the empire. Within the ranks of Rome's formidable army, a silent transformation was taking place. As Rome's frontiers stretched from the North Sea to the Persian Gulf, the thinness of her defenses became a growing concern. The winds of change whispered not only at Rome's doorstep, but also echoed within her own borders. Then there were the gladiators, those warriors of the arena who thrilled the crowds with their displays of skill and valor. Yet amidst these turbulent times, voices of reason and reflection emerged, attempting to guide Rome towards a better path. In the Senate, men of vision like Cicero championed reforms, urging restraint and a return to traditional values. But above all, it was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, who personified the struggle to uphold virtue and justice in a time of decline. And yet, despite these valiant efforts, the wheels of change were already set in motion. The story of Rome's twilight years is not merely a tale of decline, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As the sun sets on the era of the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, the evening star ascends. The peace that held Rome together began to unravel, not all at once, but like hairline fractures in ancient stone. In the 3rd century, the empire was shaken. Emperors came and went, some ruling for months, others for days. Civil wars flared. Armies marched against each other. Famine and plague darkened the skies. The silver coin lost its shine. It marked a period of intense internal strife and external pressure on the Roman Empire. The value of Roman currency plummeted, making trade more difficult and causing general economic uncertainty. The result: barbarian tribes who lived on the borders of the empire, seeing Rome's internal struggles and economic decline, thought, this is our chance. They started pushing into Roman territory. And let's not forget the Goths and the institution of the Roman Senate, once the heart of Roman power, was seen by many as an obstacle rather than a pillar. As I mentioned earlier, he split the empire into 2 halves, Western Rome with its capital in Milan, and Eastern Rome with its capital in Nicomedia. He introduced a bunch of measures to fix the problems of the empire, especially the economy. For example, he fixed the currency. During his reign, he launched a series of persecutions against Christians across the empire. Do you think splitting the empire was the best solution for Rome's problems? Let us know in the comments section below. It's always great to hear your thoughts. Now, why did he do this? Well, Christians were becoming more numerous and influential, and Diocletian saw them as a potential threat to the traditional Roman values and authority. Plus, he needed a scapegoat to blame for the empire's problems. And persecuting Christians was a popular way for leaders to do that. He showed that the old ways weren't working. The Senate, the assemblies, the traditions, they couldn't handle the challenges of a vast, complex empire. Rome needed a new system, a new way of thinking, a new kind of emperor. Fasten your seatbelts because we're about to enter the world of Emperor Constantine. Join us next time as we continue the story of Rome's fall in episode 3. Don't miss it. Stay tuned. These persecutions were brutal. Christians were tortured, executed, and their property was confiscated. But they also played a key role in spreading Christianity. The persecution strengthened the resolve of early Christians and inspired more people to convert to the faith. Remember, inflation had hurt the value of Roman money a lot. So he introduced new coins with better designs and more accurate weights to try and restore trust in the currency. Then there are his price controls. After a reign of 21 years, Diocletian abdicated in 305 BC. He chose his close friend, Maximian, to succeed him in the west and his son-in-law, Constantius, in the east. But within a few years, both of them were gone, along with the Tetrarchy. The empire was plunged into another period of civil war and instability. By the end of the 3rd century, Rome had been through so much. The crisis of the 3rd century had pushed it to the edge, and Diocletian's attempts to fix it were like bandages on a bullet wound. The deep rot that had set in over the past decades wouldn't be easy to erase. He set maximum prices for certain goods, especially grain, to try and make them more affordable. And he also introduced a new tax system to try and bring in more revenue for the empire. He even tried to limit the power of the Senate, which he saw as a source of instability. To be honest, these reforms were pretty radical for the time, but they were also controversial. While some of his policies did bring short-term relief, they also had negative consequences in the long run. For example, his price controls didn't address the root causes of inflation, and his efforts to limit the Senate's power only highlighted the growing rift between the old Roman elites and the new imperial court. Now, you might be wondering why he did this. Well, the simple answer is he needed help. The empire was just too big to handle alone. Plus, there was a lot of pressure from outside. The 3rd century crisis had shown him how vulnerable Rome could be, so he thought dividing the power would make the empire more efficient and stronger. But it wasn't just about practicality. Diocletian also believed that this way he could control the ambitions of the military. See, the army was becoming more powerful and assertive, and he wanted to keep them in check. By giving some of the power to the army leaders, he could balance out the scales. It worked to some extent, but this system didn't last for long. Personal rivalries and ambitions of the rulers eventually caused the tetrarchy to fall apart. But Diocletian's solution was bold and drastic. He split the empire in two. He designated his able lieutenant Maximian to rule the western half with its capital in Milan, and he chose his close friend Constantius to govern the eastern half with its capital in Nicomedia, today modern Istanbul. This tetrarchy, meaning rule of four, didn't last long, but it left a lasting legacy. They did their part in sacking Rome in 269. So we have political instability, economic troubles, and external pressures. Add those together and you get the perfect storm. It's a wonder Rome survived the 3rd century crisis. This wasn't just a blip on the radar of Roman history. This was a major turning point. Historians identify several factors that contributed to this crisis. Here's a question for you. What do you think was the biggest challenge facing Rome in the 3rd century and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Political instability was a big one. Gaius Aurelius Diocletian was born into a family of Roman freedmen, which means his parents were once slaves who gained their freedom. He was born around 240 AD at Bela in Lower Mysia, today's Bulgaria. His early life is shrouded in mystery, but we know he rose through the ranks of the Roman army. He served under Emperor Marcus Aurelius during the war with the Germanic tribes in the early 2nd century. His military skills were impressive, so much so that later when power struggles and civil wars shook the empire, he was called upon to put down rebellions. Eventually, he found himself at the center of a power struggle. By 284 AD, he seized the purple, the traditional symbol of imperial authority, and became the sole ruler of the empire. You see, from the year 180, when Commodus died, up until the reign of Septimius Severus, there had been a relative peace in the empire. There was a lot of civil war before and after that, but those 80 years were a golden age of sorts, the Pax Romana. That changed in the 3rd century. We saw more than 20 emperors in less than 80 years. Some ruled for months, others for weeks, and some not even for a day. Talk about a revolving door in the imperial palace. Civil wars and power struggles became a regular thing. Armies loyal to different emperors clashed across the provinces. And this constant turmoil didn't help the economy either. Trade slowed, faith wavered. Barbarian tribes, once distant shadows beyond the Rhine and Danube, now pressed harder. Some came as invaders, others came as refugees, and then something extraordinary happened. A soldier emperor named Diocletian rose. With iron discipline, he divided the empire in two, east and west, not to weaken, but to save it. 2 emperors, 2 courts, 1 empire. He introduced reforms, tried to tame inflation, and demanded unity, even through persecution. But the old Rome, the Rome of the Senate and slow debates, of togas and ideals, it was slipping away. A new Rome was coming, one that wore armor, one that prayed differently, one that looked east. This is the 2nd episode in our series on the fall of Rome. If you're new here, stay tuned to join us every Monday for new episodes on all things history. Today, we tell the story of the 3rd century crisis and the rise of Diocletian, one of the most fascinating, contradictory figures of antiquity. The crisis that rocked Rome in the 3rd century is often called the 3rd century crisis or the imperial crisis. Then there was the issue with the economy. Inflation was a big problem. And from the ashes of this crisis, Diocletian emerged as one of the most influential emperors of his time. Now let's get back to Diocletian. Now, when he took over, the empire was on the brink. The economy was still struggling. The borders were threatened. Let's talk about the tetrarchy because it is one of the most important features of Diocletian's reign. Next, let's talk about Diocletian's reforms. Finally, let's discuss Diocletian's persecution of Christians. So here's my question for you. To understand the significance of Diocletian's rule, we need to look at what happened after he stepped down. Still, he left behind a legacy, not just in the division of the empire, but in the very essence of how Rome was governed. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the great city. As darkness falls, the bustling marketplace empties, the merchants packing up their wares, the shoppers clutching their purchases close. His brow is creased with concentration, his muscles straining against the heavy tools he wields with practiced ease. Outside, the last rays of sunlight vanish, leaving the sky inky black, studded with countless stars. The blacksmith pauses, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and gazes up at the heavens. As he walked into the darkening streets, the sounds of the city slowly faded away, leaving him in a world of uncertainty, much like Rome itself stood on the precipice of an uncertain future. Under Constantine the Great, Rome changed its soul. The Christian cross replaced the eagle. The emperor no longer bowed to Jupiter, but to one god. The empire survived, but it was no longer the Rome of old. He sees the familiar constellations and remembers tales his father told him about gods who once walked the earth. The evening air grows colder, rustling the leaves of ancient trees that have seen centuries come and go. Here where once the great emperors had held court, where the Senate had debated and citizens had gathered, now only ghosts remained. He felt the echoes of their triumphs and their tragedies, the glory of their conquests, and the weight of their failures. The spirit of Marcus Aurelius brushed against him, reminding him of the duty to serve the state, to uphold justice, and to strive for excellence. The cynical ghost of Caligula taunted him, questioning the cost of power and the burden of legacy. The Forum was a graveyard of memories, not by kings or armies, but by a people once called barbarians. But in its ability to adapt, to incorporate new peoples and ideas into its rich tapestry, picture yourself walking through the bustling streets of Rome, the sounds and smells of the marketplace all around you. It's a story that's a part of you, a story that has shaped the world you live in today. You'll see that the innovations and achievements of the Romans, their contributions to law, language, art, and architecture continue to influence us in ways we may not even realize. See the chariots racing along the Appian Way and the legionaries marching in formation. Feel the excitement of watching gladiators battle in the Colosseum, or the eye-inspiring spectacle of the Roman Navy sailing into port. Thanks for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, may your days be filled with the spirit of adventure and discovery. Just as Augustus had done in his time, Rome must evolve to survive. The Western Empire struggled on, a flicker in the wind. You never know what treasures of history you might uncover next. Whose words had laid the foundation for the Pax Romana, the 2-century-long era of Roman peace. In Augustus's legacy, he saw a glimmer of hope for the future of Rome. If Augustus could transform a republic into an empire, perhaps the Western Empire too could be reborn from the ashes of the old. And then, in 476, a Roman emperor in the West, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. You might be wandering through a museum gazing at Roman mosaics or sculptures, or you might be reading a book about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, immersing yourself in the tales of its legendary emperors and generals. Not with blood, but with resignation. A general placed the imperial robes aside, and Rome, the city that never fell, simply stopped being. The road ahead was uncertain, But he was no longer afraid. He understood now that the story of Rome was not over. It was merely changing chapters. The Western Empire was done. The Western Empire, stretched thin, began to fade. Germanic tribes crossed borders, not always in war, but in waves. Some were welcomed, some were not. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, names whispered in fear and legend. They brought with them new gods and customs, challenging the old ways of life. But in the hushed stillness, another sound pierces the quiet, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing from a nearby shop. Inside, a burly man with arms like iron rods works diligently at his forge, shaping red-hot metal until it yields to his will. It lives on in the rustle of the leaves overhead, in the grain that fills the granaries of the south, and the stones that form the very heart of this great city. Rome lives on in language, in law, in architecture, in the echo of its triumphs and the memory of its grandeur. In those stories, the world was young and magic filled every corner. When Zeus hurled thunderbolts, the ground trembled, and mortals lived in constant fear of divine wrath. History is about the pulse of humanity, the ebb and flow of cultures, the rise and fall of nations. It's about the stories we tell and the legacy we leave behind. When the Western Empire fell, it didn't disappear. It became memory, a foundation upon which new stories would be written. But that was before Rome had risen, before the eagle had soared across the world, bringing law and order to a chaotic Rome. Rumors of a new emperor, a man who turned his back on the traditions of the past and embraced strange, even blasphemous ways. Some spoke of this Constantine with reverence, others with scorn, but all agreed that Rome would never be the same. As the first stars twinkled in the night sky, he knew he could not ignore the signs of change any longer. With a heavy heart, he extinguished the fire in his forge and shouldered his tools. The embers glowed faintly, reflecting the turmoil in his own soul. He thought of the great emperors, of legions that marched under their banners, of roads that snaked across distant lands, connecting all corners of the empire under one roof. For Rome was more than just a city. It was the heart of the world. Here in the West, life had known peace for generations. But lately, whispers of change had been carried on the winds from the east. For within him, the old ways wrestled with the new, the familiar comfort of tradition battling with the allure of the unknown. So it was in 330 that the capital moved, not to Athens, not to Carthage, but to a city once called Byzantium. Its new name, Constantinople. The Eastern Empire, wealthy and fortified, became the heart. In 410, the unthinkable happened. Rome, eternal, mighty proud, was sacked. And yet, as I watch you stand there, hammer in hand, amidst the dying embers of a fading age, I see that Rome did not die. You see, history is not just about dates and battles, about emperors and conquests. As the moon climbed higher in the star-studded sky, he arrived at the Forum, the heart of ancient Rome. Amongst these silent stones, he saw the ghosts of Julius Caesar, Augustus, Nero, Hadrian, all those who had shaped Rome into a legend. But above it all, he sensed the presence of Augustus, the first emperor whose vision had transformed Rome from a republic into an empire. He realized that the strength of Rome lay not in its armies or its vast territories. As the night deepened and the spirits of Rome faded into the shadows, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. And so he returned to his forge, his steps lighter, his spirit brighter, ready to face the dawn of a new day and the enduring legacy of Rome. Today, you might find yourself exploring the ruins of ancient Rome, standing in the shadow of the Colosseum or the Pantheon, marveling at the aqueducts that once brought water to the city or the roads that connected it to far-flung quarters of the empire. Wherever you are, take a moment to close your eyes and imagine what it would have been like to live in Roman times. And when you open your eyes again, you'll realize that the story of Rome is not just a story of the past. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep discovering the amazing legacy of the Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this historical fiction episode, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel.